My name's Callie, I'm the Okayest Engineer, and in today's video we're starting off in the hallway because it is an absolute hot mess in there. We go from a blue, white, and pink helicopter that's pretty okay looking to a pretty nasty blue, pink, and green helicopter. You guys also requested kind of a lessons learned from the last seat mold that I made, so I'm going to take that opportunity now to feed in a whole bunch of information, not only how you should do things, but more importantly, how you shouldn't. So those will be sprinkled in. I hope you learn a lot. Let's get to the video. All right, guys, I think we have the foam as far as we can take it. It's all sanded down. It's relatively smooth. The transition from the foam to the fuselage is about as good as I can take it. And I think we're ready to go. The next step in this process is actually to lay down a skin of fiberglass cloth to strengthen this foam to a point where we can start making a mold. But before we get into any of that, I want to go over two big important things. The first of which is the stack up of this plug and mold. If you let the red represent the foam plug, then the next step in the process would be to come in and create a mold from that plug. And that mold can be represented by this green block. Basically, the mold takes an exact negative of the plug. The next step in a traditional process is you would remove the mold from the plug and you would lay your part into the mold. Whatever that part thickness is, in our case, it's going to be carbon fiber and 40 thousandths, you end up with material, your part, interfering with the actual plug or the part that you're trying to mate it to. And so the only way to fix this is to add whatever thickness you have in material to your plug before you put your mold onto it. So in my case, I want 4 layers of carbon, which measures about 40 thousandths of thickness when the part is fully cured. So I need to add basically 40 thousandths of thickness to my plug and the fuselage to represent my future part, and then lay the mold up on top of that. So what am I going to use for this filler? Well, turns out from the seat mold that I made a while ago, I used 1 layer of 6-ounce fiberglass cloth, and between that, a little bit of body filler, and then some high build primer. It just so happened, I got really lucky, that whole stack measures about 40 thousandths. So, hence where we are now. I'm gonna go lay 1 layer of 6-ounce fiberglass cloth onto the pink plug, which will give it strength and account for that 40 thousandths that I need for my future part. I'm also going to extend that fiberglass cloth all the way onto the body of the fuselage, once again to represent the thickness of my carbon part, and I won't have to worry about that interfering in the future. The second thing we need to talk about are the materials we'll be using. Total Boat was nice enough to provide all the epoxies that I'll be using for this project. Stoked to have them on board. They've also extended a 5% discount to anyone who uses the affiliate link in the description. The biggest thing you need to take away for now is the fact that there's a big difference between polyester resin and epoxy resin. The main is the cost. Epoxy resin's about twice the cost as polyester, but polyester resin will dissolve polystyrene. And so I cannot use, and cannot stress enough, do not use polyester resin on polystyrene. So we'll be using epoxy resin and 6-ounce fiberglass cloth for this next step. It's obviously not going to be possible to lay just 1 layer everywhere because the fiberglass cloth isn't big enough or it won't conform to all the geometry. So there will be some overlap. I've decided, just because I think it's going to be right, that I'm going to do everything I can to make the bigger surfaces, so the left and right side, one layer, and I'm trying to preserve any overlap. We'll see if I can actually make it happen, but preserve any overlaps to the top and the bottom. The reason for that is these sides are super flat. Those have more contour, and I'm hoping that I can hide the extra 40 thousandths-ish of thickness and that unevenness in the contours, and be able to bondo that and contour it all out and have it be nice and smooth. So that's going to be the challenge. I'm going to try and make some templates and then lay this thing on and try to preserve any overlaps that I have up top. Also, this was kind of interesting and I was concerned about it for a while. I'm going to lay a layer of fiberglass cloth over a section of the boom as well, because the carbon part will bond to this location here. Now you're going to ask, well, how the heck are you going to get that carbon off later? And I'll probably end up coming in when this is all said and done and sand down until I hit the blue tape. And that will give me basically a cut along the entire piece. And then once I have a cut, I can kind of peel all this off. Foreshadowing here, I have no idea if it's going to work. But that is my thought. And so I will, and I think I've decided, I will end up losing 100% of this plug. It's going to be just sad to destroy so much work. But this plug, I think in the future, is going to have to be destroyed in order to get it off the helicopter. But you know what? That's the price you got to pay. And real quick, something I learned from doing the seat mold, it's really important that you lay down a really nice layer of epoxy directly onto the foam. This lets that foam kind of soak up that epoxy and give you something for your fiberglass to lay down onto. If you try to do it the other way, where you put the glass down first and try and push that epoxy through, you just end up with a whole bunch of lean spots and bubbles, and it's just not ideal. And there you have it. I actually think it turned out pretty great. It went down better than I anticipated, which is always a good thing. It did take me a couple days, mainly because I did need to tilt it over on its side so that I could get the bottom of the helicopter, so I had to let that cure before I could switch it back. But that's okay. It was nice little layups. They took about an hour at a time. I did get one layer down basically everywhere. There are a few locations that there's some overlap, but I hid those kind of in concave areas, so it should be easier to cover up. And then I did actually put 2 layers on the boom, mainly because that piece, when it's done, it'll make more sense later, but when it's done, it's going to be a full circumferential piece. And I didn't want to run into a situation where it didn't actually fit all the way down onto the boom. So having 2 layers of fiberglass here should help ensure that it does go all the way down. And worst case scenario, I end up using a little bit more glue to secure that part and fill up that gap. A couple lessons learned: you should always use more resin than not. This side turned out really, really good. The other side, there's a couple lean spots, which, I mean, I still think it's going to be fine, but in an ideal world, I probably should have just used a little bit more resin. We're going to sand this down, get rid of all the high spots. I don't actually anticipate needing very much Bondo or fairing compound. Everything went down really nice, so I guess that's a good thing, less sanding for me. And then I'll probably plan on putting 2 really, really thick coats of high build primer and then sand all that down. Hopefully I can get a really nice smooth cowling and transition from the fuselage to the cowling, and this part should be, I hope, gorgeous. The boom and the cowling are now permanently, at least semi-permanently fixed to the helicopter. So there's no way to take the boom off from this point forward until we're done with these molds. Hence the round of musical chairs to get this thing turned around to get the nose back into the dirty portion of the basement. All right, we got the nose in here, but we got a couple issues. One, it's not quite in far enough. That's mainly because it's running into the CNC router. And you may or may not have noticed, but when it's on a table, it's actually way too high. And then when it's on the ground, I can't get underneath it to do any body work on the bottom. And so ideally, I need it about halfway in between. So I think what I'm going to do, a little jank, but it's going to work. I'm going to lay down some pavers, just the same ones that I used for putting all the foam together, and build it up maybe about 1.5 feet or so. And then just to make sure it doesn't fall off those pavers, I'll end up anchoring it to the rafters or the joists up top, just as like a safety mechanism. So we're going to get it at least to a point where it's a lot easier to work on and work all the way around, and then the sanding starts. Well, I feel like I'm about to lose a little bit of maybe some, respect, credibility. Not super proud of this setup, but I'm going to show you guys anyways. So that's how I hoisted it up there. It's a double loop, so basically it's half the weight on my hands as the total helicopter. And then I use the boat anchor for friction so that it won't basically fall while I'm pulling it up, and then I can anchor it off once it's there. Right now, this is just mostly slack. It's the insurance again, if you will. And then on the bottom, this is what I'm not super proud of, but I have some cinder blocks to stack some height, and then I use some of the leftover foam that I had from cutting just to protect the fuselage and give it something soft to sit on. That was rather wobbly, and so I decided to anchor it down one more time with a ratchet strap all the way down to my routing table. The ratchet strap does kind of a loop, as you can see in there, so gives a little bit more friction and will prevent it from sliding anywhere up there. And then I have it basically tight enough, still pretty loose, but I don't want to ruin the fuselage, and I want it to hold it relatively stiff. So it's good enough. Oh, I'm gonna fall. It's good enough. It's gonna hold it all here while I sand, and I don't think I'm gonna have any issues, but figure transparency, that's what I'm gonna do. Well, things are going about as okay as they could be. It's sanding it down fairly well, but one really annoying thing is that the epoxy, I don't know if it's just not fully cured or not, but it's gumming up my sandpaper really quickly. And as soon as it gums up the sandpaper, it's basically useless. So that's been super annoying. Other than that, it's going okay. I'm getting the high spots down. I did run into a few lean and thin areas that, learning from the seat mold, if you don't take care of those areas now, it becomes a huge issue later on. So I'm going to take special attention, mark them out, cut them out, and then probably backfill them with some fairing compound just to make sure that they're really sturdy. So that's something to take note of. And then last, the contour between the fuselage and the cowling is actually a little off. So I'm going to have to put probably about an 1/8 of an inch of filler in this area to bring it back out so it matches the contour of the fuselage. I'm trying to be really careful on this first layer on the fuselage, because as you remember, that's making up for what will eventually be the carbon part. Since this area is high, if I can continue to sand that down and it gets into this fiberglass and closer to the fuselage, it's going to be really bad and hard to fix. So I think, just as kind of like a reminder to myself, I'm going to just put blue tape over here so I don't continue to sand that down while I work on the rest of this area over here, and just don't accidentally take too much material away. So I'll clean this up, put some blue tape down, fix these really thin areas, and then just start filling this thing with some body filler, and I think it's going to start to come to shape. The body filler we're going to be using on the outside of this plug is the same body filler we used on the seat mold. That's Total Boat Total Fair fairing compound. This stuff is super lightweight. It sands extremely nice, and I actually really like it. This particular Total Fair fairing compound is an epoxy-based compound. That's extremely important to note. We will be using a polyester-based gel coat. In general, you never want to put a polyester on top of an epoxy. You only ever want to put an epoxy on top of a polyester. So that is basically why I had a huge problem on the seat mold. Epoxy-based filler followed up with polyester gel coat is a disaster. So I am going to be using epoxy-based filler again, but I'm going to make sure that the entire plug is coated in a full coat of, it's actually an epoxy-based primer, but that seals it, and that epoxy primer plays extremely well with polyester gel coat. So just a really important note there. You want to make sure that whatever you're laying down to prep your mold is compatible with whatever gel coat that you plan to use in the future. Mixing this stuff is pretty easy. It's basically a 50-50 split. You mix it then together, and as soon as it turns all green, you are good to go. Right here I'm using a 16-inch drywall trowel to basically give me a really nice smooth flat surface to fill in that low area. Experience has taught me that one nice smooth motion is best, and going back and trying to fix anything turns out to be a disaster. So let it cure, sand it down if you need to, and if it does actually need a little bit more filler, go back and do it again. Another quick tip for making fillets with body filler is to just use popsicle sticks. In this instance, I used a 1-inch wide popsicle stick, and you can see it made a pretty perfect little fillet in there. Right here is the transition between the fuselage over here and then what will eventually be the cowling over here. And as expected, this is my biggest issue. I don't think that my CAD of the fuselage was perfect. And so the angle and transition between the two is not ideal, hence the extra amount of filler that we're having to use. But I wanted to show you guys kind of a thing that I'm using to see if I'm on the right track and where I need to place filler. So this is just a metal ruler, a straight edge, and basically what I'm trying to do is I'm rocking this against the fuselage, and it should have one continuous rock, which would mean that this is one entirely concave or convex surface. If this thing hangs up anywhere, it means I have a low spot or it's concave. And so up here, I'll start up here, and you can kind of see if I go slowly, it basically walks the whole way, and you're looking at the separation of light underneath. And so this is a nice, smooth, clean curve up here. As I come down here, you'll see that as I come off the fuselage, it hits here to a flat spot, then it hits here again at a flat spot, and then it continues off. So somewhere between here and here is low, and there's a little low spot kind of over here. And so I'm basically just doing this across the whole thing, and then I'll make some notes with a Sharpie, and between sanding down some high spots and then filling in some lows, eventually I want this to have a really nice, smooth kind of surface. And that's, once again, once you put gloss down on this, it's going to expose everything. And so if there's any type of waviness in this fuselage, in the mold or the plug, it's just going to look like trash later. So that's the battle. We'll get there. It's really only in this area. The rest of this thing is obviously great because it's just standalone. I didn't have to mate up with anybody. I've been able to do about 2 coats of fairing compound a day. I start by sanding everything down and then doing another wet coat. That dries for about 12 hours. I do it again at night and then rinse and repeat. As you can see, most of that Bondo has managed to work its way back into dust and get on the floor. I've got about, I don't know, if I had to guess, about maybe 8 to 10 coats on here. You can see the different sets of patches. And I think I've taken it as far as I possibly can go. I really need to get one smooth single color layer down so that I can start to assess and see if there's any ripples or crazy lines that are happening in here. That's gonna do it for this video. Come back next week. We'll lay down a nice clean layer of that gray primer and hopefully bring this thing back to looking beautiful again, and then start assessing to see if we need any more tweaks going forward. But before you go, I need some help selecting the logo for the Okayest Engineer. I work with a follower of the channel by the name of Jared Litwiller, and his business name is called Sunrise Graphics. His contact info is linked in the description. Do me a favor and let me know which one of these 5 you like best, or if you think they're all crap and I should do something else. And as always, go build something cool, never stop learning, and we'll see you on the next one.